Julian thought he was untouchable. He stood in the middle of the courtroom, flashing a winning smile, convinced he had just pulled off the robbery of the century. He had stripped his wife, Elena, of everything, her home, her savings, and her dignity. He bragged to his friends that she was weak and that her family was nobody. But Julian made a fatal calculation. He forgot that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the calm before the storm. He didn't know that Elena's estranged father wasn't just a retired old man. He was a nightmare waiting to happen. And by the time Julian realized who he was really up against, it was already too late. October 14th, 2023. The Grill, Midtown Manhattan. The champagne in Julian Thorne's glass cost more than most people's monthly rent. But tonight, the price tag didn't matter. Tonight, everything tasted like victory. To the single life, Julian announced, raising the crystal flute high. The light from the chandeliers danced in the golden liquid. Sitting across from him in the plush leather booth was Marcus, his lawyer, a man with a shark's grin and a moral compass that pointed wherever the money was, and Sophia, the woman Julian had been seeing for the last 6 months. Sophia was 23, with ambition that matched Julian's, and a lack of empathy that made them a perfect match. "You really cleaned her out, didn't you?" Marcus chuckled, loosening his silk tie. "I've seen brutal divorces, Julian. But that settlement, that was art, leaving her with the 2014 Honda and the debt from the failed gallery business. Genius." Julian took a sip, savoring the burn. "Elena is soft, Marcus. She always was. She thinks the world runs on kindness and fair play. I just corrected her worldview." He looked at Sophia, who was busy scrolling through Zillow on her phone. "Are we getting the lake house, baby?" she asked, not looking up. "We got the lake house, the penthouse on 5th, and the entire investment portfolio," Julian bragged, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. He wanted them to hear. He was 42, the CEO of Thorne Logistics, and he had just shed the dead weight of a 10-year marriage to a woman who, in his eyes, had ceased to be useful. "She didn't even fight for the stocks," Julian laughed, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "I hid the assets in the shell company in the Caymans, just like we planned, but honestly, I don't think I even needed to." She just sat there in the deposition, staring at her hands. It was pathetic. "What about her family?" Sophia asked, finally looking up. "Didn't you say her dad was some scary guy?" Julian burst out laughing, a harsh, barking sound. "Scary. Arthur. The guy is a recluse. He lives in some cabin in upstate New York. He spends his days growing tomatoes and reading old books. He wasn't at the wedding, and he wasn't at the divorce hearings. The man is a ghost. Elena hasn't spoken to him properly in 5 years. He has 0 power. He's a nobody." Julian felt the vibration of his phone in his pocket. He pulled it out. It was a text from Eleanor. "I'm packing the last of the boxes. I'll be gone by 8 p.m. Please don't come back until then." Julian sneered and typed a reply. "It's my house now. I'll come back whenever I want. Be out by 7, or I'm throwing your trash on the curb." "Trouble?" Marcus asked. "Just the help clearing out?" Julian smirked. "Let's order another bottle. The vintage Dom Perignon. Put it on the company card. Technically, since the divorce was finalized at 4 p.m., she can't touch a cent of the company funds anymore." They drank until the city lights blurred. Julian felt like a titan. He had built Thorne Logistics from a mid-sized courier service into a shipping empire, or so he told everyone. In reality, he had used Elena's inheritance from her grandmother to jumpstart the business 10 years ago, a detail he had conveniently omitted from the court records. He had climbed the ladder on her back, and now that he was at the top, he had kicked the ladder away. You know? Julian slurred slightly, leaning in close to Marcus. The best part isn't the money. It's the look on her face when the judge read the decree. She looked broken, like a porcelain doll someone stepped on. You're a cold bastard, Julian, Marcus laughed. I'm a winner, Marcus. There's a difference. Julian checked his Rolex. 7:15 p.m. Let's go, Julian said, standing up and swaying slightly. I want to make sure the rat is actually gone. And Sophia, you should come. You can start picking out curtains. The rain was coming down in sheets as Julian's black Mercedes G-Wagon pulled into the driveway of the expansive estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The house was a sprawling colonial masterpiece, white pillars gleaming in the headlights. It was a symbol of everything Julian valued: status, wealth, and appearances. As the headlights swept across the front yard, they illuminated a solitary figure standing by the curb. It was Eleanor. She was standing next to a beat-up sedan, the 2014 Honda Accord the judge had graciously allowed her to keep. The trunk was open, and she was struggling to fit a large cardboard box inside. She was soaking wet, her brown hair plastered to her face, her beige trench coat dark with rain. Julian honked the horn long and loud, startling her. She dropped the box. Books spilled out onto the wet asphalt. Look at her, Julian sneered to Sophia as he parked the car. Tragic. He stepped out of the car, not bothering to open an umbrella. He wanted her to see him in his bespoke suit, unbothered by the elements, while she drowned. I told you 7 o'clock, Elena, Julian shouted over the sound of the rain. It's 7:45. You're trespassing. Elena knelt on the wet ground, frantically trying to gather the books. They were old leather-bound volumes, some of the few things she had asked for. I'm going, Julian. The car wouldn't start at first. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Sophia stepped out of the passenger side, holding a designer umbrella. She walked over, her heels clicking on the pavement, and looked down at Eleanor with a mixture of pity and disgust. You need help with that? Sophia asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She reached out with the tip of her boot and nudged a book that had fallen into a puddle. Oops. I think that one's ruined. Elena looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. But there was something in her expression that Julian hadn't seen before. It wasn't the submission he was used to. It was a cold, hard resolve. Enjoy the house, Sophia, Elena said quietly, her voice trembling but clear. It has thin walls. You'll hear every lie he tells you. Shut up, Julian snapped, striding forward. He kicked the remaining pile of books toward the gutter. Get off my property. Now, or I call the police and have you dragged off. Elena stood up. She didn't try to save the books in the gutter. She just looked at them, then at Julian. You took the accounts, Elena said. You took the house. You even took the dog, and you hate that dog. Why do you have to be cruel, Julian? You won. Because I can, Julian hissed, leaning into her face. Because you are nothing without me. You were nothing when I met you, just a quiet girl with a little bit of inheritance money that you didn't know how to use. I built this life. I earned this. You were just a passenger. I was your partner, she whispered. You were an anchor, he corrected, and I just cut the rope. Elena stared at him for a long moment. The rain ran down her face like tears, but her eyes were dry. She turned to the car, slammed the trunk shut on the few meager possessions she had managed to salvage, and got into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered, whined, and finally caught. As she backed out of the driveway, Julian yelled after her, Go cry to your daddy! Oh wait, he doesn't care about you either. He laughed as the taillights disappeared into the dark, rainy night. God, that felt good, Julian exhaled, turning to Sophia. Let's go inside. I need a drink. Inside, the house was warm. But it felt empty. Eleanor had taken nothing of value, but she had taken the warmth. The paintings were still on the walls, the expensive rugs on the floors, but the soul of the house was gone. Julian poured himself a scotch and walked to the window, looking out at the storm. "Who is her father, anyway?" Sophia asked, wandering around the living room, touching the sculptures. "You mentioned him earlier." "Arthur Vance," Julian shrugged. "Like I said, nobody. He used to run some small legal consultancy firm back in the 80s, I think. Then he retired to the middle of nowhere. Elena sends him letters, he sends her vegetables. That's the extent of their empire." Julian took a sip of scotch. "I checked him out years ago when we got married. His credit score was average. He had a modest pension. Zero threat. He's probably in a nursing home by now. Meanwhile, 150 miles north, the rain was falling just as hard in the Catskill Mountains. A small, unassuming cabin sat at the end of a long, gravel driveway. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone hearth. The man sitting in the leather armchair didn't look like a tycoon. He wore a knitted cardigan and corduroy trousers. He was 72 years old, with thinning white hair and hands that looked like they had worked in the soil for decades. The phone on the side table rang. It was an old landline. Arthur Vance picked it up. "Hello? Dad?" The voice was small, broken. "It's Elena." Arthur's grip on the receiver tightened. His knuckles turned white. He hadn't heard his daughter cry since she was a child. "Ellie, what's wrong? Where are you?" I'm at a motel off I-95, she sobbed. "He took everything, Dad. Julian. He took it all. The judge believed him. I have nothing left. I don't know what to do." Arthur listened as his daughter poured out the story. The humiliation, the cheating, the hidden assets, the way Julian had kicked her books into the gutter. Arthur didn't interrupt. He sat perfectly still, his blue eyes staring into the fire. But the warmth in his eyes died, replaced by a glacial coldness. When she finally finished, struggling to breathe through her tears, Arthur spoke. His voice was soft, gentle, the voice of a father comforting a child. "You are safe now, Ellie. Do you have enough money for the room?" "Yes," she sniffled, "for a few nights." "Good. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, drive up here. The guest room is ready." "I feel so stupid, Dad," she whispered. "You warned me about him 10 years ago. You said he was a wolf." "Wolves are only dangerous until they meet a bear," Arthur said calmly. "Ellie, listen to me. Did he brag? Did he gloat?" "Yes," she said. "He told me I was nothing. He said he won." "Good," Arthur said. "Arrogance makes men careless." "What are you going to do?" she asked, hearing a shift in his tone. Arthur reached over and picked up a heavy black notebook from the table. He opened it to a page marked Julian Thorne, Contingencies. "I'm going to make a few phone calls," Arthur said. "Julian thinks he divorced a housewife. He's about to find out he declared war on the wrong family." Arthur hung up the phone. He didn't go to sleep. Instead, he walked over to a safe, hidden behind a painting of a landscape. He spun the dial. Left, right, left. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside wasn't cash or jewelry. It was a stack of files, a satellite phone, and a Rolodex of numbers that hadn't been used in 15 years. Arthur Vance wasn't just a retired legal consultant. Before he retired to grow tomatoes, Arthur Vance had been the finest forensic accountant and corporate fixer on the East Coast. He was the man the billionaires called when they needed to destroy a rival without leaving a fingerprint. He was known in the inner circles simply as the Eraser. And he had just come out of retirement. November 2nd, 2023. Thorne Logistics Headquarters, 42nd floor. 2 weeks had passed since the divorce was finalized. For Julian, they had been the most profitable 2 weeks of his life. The stock price of Thorn Logistics was at an all-time high, fueled by rumors of a merger with Vanguard Global, a European shipping giant. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his corner office, looking down at the ants scurrying along the streets of Manhattan. He felt like a god on Mount Olympus. "The due diligence team from Vanguard is here," his assistant Jessica said, buzzing in on the intercom. "Mr. Sterling wants to see the Q3 audit reports." "Send them in," Julian said, smoothing his tie. "And get me a coffee. Black." Mr. Sterling was a British man with eyes like polished flint. He walked in with 2 junior associates. They didn't look happy. "Julian," Sterling said, skipping the pleasantries. "We have a hiccup." Julian laughed, gesturing to the leather chairs. "Sit down, Charles. There are no hiccups in my company, only speed bumps. What's the issue?" "The issue," Sterling said, remaining standing, "is that our forensic team just flagged a discrepancy in your supply chain payments, specifically the vendor accounts in Panama." Julian felt a tiny prick of cold sweat on his lower back. Panama was where he funneled the skimmed profits, money he had hidden from Elena during the marriage. But that was buried deep, layers of shell companies. "That's a glitch," Julian said smoothly. "My CFO will clear that up in an hour." "It's not just a glitch, Julian," Sterling said, dropping a file on the mahogany desk. "The accounts don't exist anymore." Julian frowned. "Excuse me?" "We tried to verify the liquidity of Apex Holdings, your subsidiary in Panama. The bank informed us that the accounts were closed yesterday morning. The funds were transferred to a charitable trust for victims of corporate fraud. The account balance is 0. Julian's stomach dropped. There was $6 million in that account. "That's impossible," Julian stammered, his confident mask slipping for the first time. "I have the access keys. Only I have the keys." "Well," Sterling said, buttoning his jacket, "until you find that $6 million, the merger is on hold. We don't do business with ghosts, Julian. Fix it." Sterling walked out. Julian lunged for his phone. He dialed his contact at the Panamanian bank. The line rang, and rang, and rang. Finally, a recording played. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." Julian slammed the phone down. What the hell is going on? Meanwhile, the Catskills. The morning air was crisp and smelled of pine needles. Elena sat on the porch of her father's cabin, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket. She was watching Arthur chop wood. For a man of 72, he moved with frightening efficiency. Thwack. The axe split the log perfectly down the center. Thwack. Another one. He hadn't mentioned Julian in 2 weeks. He cooked her breakfast, they went for walks, and he let her sleep. It was the peace she hadn't known she needed. "Dad?" Elena asked. Arthur stopped, resting the axe against his leg. "Yes, Ellie? You said you were going to make phone calls, but you haven't been on the phone. You've just been gardening." Arthur smiled, a small, cryptic lifting of the corner of his mouth. He walked over, wiping sweat from his brow. "Do you know how a demolition expert brings down a building, Ellie?" he asked. "Explosives?" "Placement," Arthur corrected. "Any idiot can blow things up. But if you want the building to fall into its own footprint without damaging the structures next door, you don't use force. You weaken the structural integrity at critical points. You cut the steel beams that hold the weight. Gravity does the rest." "I don't understand," she said. "Julian is a building," Arthur said, sitting on the porch steps. "I'm not attacking him. I am simply removing the beams he didn't know were holding him up." "But how?" Elena pressed. "You're just one man." Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. He tossed it to her. "What is this?" That, Arthur said, is the digital key to the back door of the banking software used by Banco de Panama. I wrote the original compliance code for them in 1998. They never changed the master override password. Elena stared at the drive. You stole his money? I repatriated your money, Arthur corrected, and I donated it, in his name. He can't sue to get it back without admitting he embezzled it in the first place. It's the perfect trap. If he screams, he goes to jail. If he stays silent, he's broke. Elena looked at her father with wide eyes. Who are you, Dad? Arthur stood up and picked up the axe. I'm just a father who doesn't like bullies. Now how about some tea? Back in Manhattan, Julian was tearing his office apart. He had fired his IT director an hour ago for incompetence. He was currently screaming at Marcus, his lawyer. I don't care how it happened, Marcus. Fix it. That money was the collateral for the Vanguard deal. Marcus looked pale. He was pacing the room, checking his own phone constantly. Julian, listen to me, Marcus said, his voice trembling. It's not just the Panama account. I just got a call from the State Bar Association. So? They're auditing me, Marcus whispered. Someone sent them a dossier. Every dirty settlement, every bribed witness from the last 10 years. They have dates, Julian. They have recordings. Julian froze. Who? I don't know, Marcus said, sweating profusely. But the email came from an anonymous server. The subject line just said, the first domino. Julian sank into his chair. The silence in the room was deafening. Who are we fighting, Marcus? Julian asked quietly. I don't know, the lawyer replied. But whoever they are, they know everything. November 10th, 2023. The Metropolitan Gala. Despite the chaos erupting behind the scenes, Julian insisted on attending the Metropolitan Charity Gala. It was the social event of the season. Appearances were everything. If the market smelled fear, Thorn Logistics stock would plummet. He wore a $5,000 tuxedo. Sophia was on his arm, wearing a red dress that screamed for attention. But Julian wasn't looking at her. His eyes were darting around the room, scanning the faces of the city's elite. Usually, people flocked to him. Tonight, he felt a chill. When he approached the table of the city comptroller, a man Julian had golfed with for years, the man suddenly found great interest in his salad. Bill, Julian said, forcing a smile. Good to see you. Julian, Bill said curtly, not standing up. Busy night. Julian felt the snub like a physical slap. He moved to the bar. He ordered a double scotch. Rough night? Julian turned. Standing next to him was an older man, distinguished, with silver hair and a monocle. It was heavy-hitter investor Silas Thorne, no relation, a man Julian had been trying to court for years. Just the usual envy, Julian quipped. I heard about the Vanguard deal stalling, Silas said, swirling his wine. Rumor has it there are liquidity issues. Lies spread by competitors, Julian insisted. Is it? Silas turned to face him fully. Because I received a very interesting fax this morning. Yes, a fax. Old school. What did it say? Julian asked, his throat tight. It was a transcript, Silas said, lowering his voice, of a conversation between you and your mistress, your fiancée, at the grill, the night of your divorce. Julian's blood ran cold. The conversation where he bragged about hiding assets. That's illegal, Julian hissed. That's wiretapping. It's information, Julian, Silas said coldly. And in this town, information is currency. The transcript was sent to the entire board of directors of Vanguard. They aren't just pausing the merger, son. They're pulling out. Tonight. Silas patted Julian on the shoulder. You're toxic, Julian. Nobody is going to touch you. You're radioactive. Silas walked away. Julian stood alone at the bar, the noise of the party fading into a high-pitched ringing in his ears. He grabbed Sophia's arm, hard. "We're leaving." "Ow! Julian, stop! I haven't even had dessert." "We're leaving now." He dragged her out of the ballroom, ignoring the stairs. The car ride home. "You're hurting me," Sophia screamed as he sped down the highway. "What is wrong with you?" "Shut up!" Julian roared, hitting the steering wheel. "Someone is doing this. Someone is systematically destroying me." "Who?" Sophia cried. "Elena? She's too stupid." "It's not Elena," Julian yelled. It has to be someone powerful, a competitor, maybe Vanguard themselves trying to lower the price." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It was a private investigator named Rocco, a man who found dirt for a living. "Rocco, it's Thorne. I need a job done. Tonight." "I'm expensive, Mr. Thorne," Rocco's gravelly voice answered. "I don't care. I need you to find out everything you can about Arthur Vance, my ex-wife's father." "Vance?" Rocco paused. The silence on the line stretched for 10 seconds. "Rocco? I can't take the job, Mr. Thorne." "What? I'll pay double." "I don't want your money," Rocco said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you're messing with Arthur Vance, you're already dead. You just don't know it yet." "He's a tomato farmer," Julian screamed. "He's the eraser," Rocco said. 20 years ago, he dismantled the Coretti crime family from the inside using nothing but a spreadsheet. He made 3 billionaires disappear from the Forbes list in a week. We all thought he died. If he's coming for you, my advice, run. Leave the country. Don't go home. Click. Julian stared at the phone. The eraser. He looked at Sophia. She was staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. "Julian," she whispered, pointing out the window. "Look." They were pulling up to the Greenwich estate. The house was dark, but it wasn't just the lights. The front gate was open. And sitting on the front steps of the massive mansion was a single wooden chair. Sitting in the chair was a small, leather-bound book. Julian stopped the car. He told Sophia to stay inside. He walked slowly up the driveway, the gravel crunching under his dress shoes. The wind howled through the trees. He reached the chair. He picked up the book. It was one of the books he had kicked into the gutter. The Count of Monte Cristo. It was dry, clean. There was a bookmark sticking out. Julian opened it to the marked page. A passage was highlighted in yellow. "I have been taken by Satan into the highest mountain in the earth. And when he showed me all the kingdoms of the world, and said to me, 'All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me,' I said, 'Get thee behind me, Satan.'" Below the text, a note was handwritten in elegant cursive. "You worshipped the money, Julian. Now the bill is due." Suddenly, floodlights from the lawn blazed to life, blinding him. Julian shielded his eyes. "Police!" a voice boomed from the darkness. "Julian Thorne, put your hands in the air." Red and blue lights flickered against the white pillars of his stolen house. "What is this?" Julian screamed. "I own this house." A detective stepped out of the glare. "Mr. Thorne, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding tax evasion, securities fraud, and the embezzlement of funds from the Vance estate." As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, tight, cold, and unforgiving, Julian looked past the police cars. Parked across the street, in the shadows, was an old, nondescript pickup truck. Julian squinted. The window of the truck rolled down slowly. An old man with white hair sat in the driver's seat. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't gloating. He simply nodded once, and then rolled the window back up. Arthur Vance drove away into the night, leaving Julian Thorne to scream his innocence to officers who had already seen the evidence. But this wasn't the end. This was just the foreclosure. November 12th, 2023, the detention center. Julian Thorne had never worn polyester in his life. Now, he was wearing an orange jumpsuit that smelled of bleach and someone else's sweat. He had spent 48 hours in a holding cell before his bail was set at a staggering $5 million. He managed to post it by liquidating his emergency crypto accounts, the only assets the government hadn't frozen yet. When he walked out of the precinct, he expected a fleet of lawyers and Sophia waiting for him. Instead, he was met by a wall of camera flashes. The paparazzi were there. The financial bloggers were there. "Mr. Thorne, is it true you embezzled from your wife's family trust?" "Julian, how do you comment on the allegations that Thorne Logistics is a Ponzi scheme?" He pushed through them, shielding his eyes, looking for his driver. But the black Mercedes wasn't there. He had to hail a yellow taxi, a final indignity that made his skin crawl. He directed the driver to the penthouse on 5th Avenue. He needed a shower, a drink, and a strategy. He would crush Arthur Vance. He would sue the police department. He would burn it all down. When he arrived at the penthouse, his keycard didn't work. He tried it again. Nothing. The red light blinked mockingly. The concierge, a man named Henry, whom Julian had tipped generously for years, walked out from behind the desk. He didn't look deferential today. He looked tired. "Mr. Thorne, you can't be here," Henry said, blocking the elevator. "What are you talking about, Henry? Open the elevator." "The lease was in the company's name, sir," Henry explained, avoiding eye contact. "The board of directors convened this morning. You've been removed as CEO, effective immediately. They terminated the lease. The locks have been changed." "Removed!" Julian screamed, his voice echoing in the marble lobby. "I am the company. I built it." "They also confiscated your personal items inside as company property to cover liabilities," Henry added. "Miss Sophia took her things earlier today. She left a note." Henry handed Julian a folded piece of hotel stationery. Julian snatched it. He unfolded it with shaking hands. It was short. "Julian, I can't be associated with a criminal. My modeling agency said it's bad for the brand. I'm going to stay with my sister in Miami. Don't call me. Also, the diamond earrings you gave me were fake. You cheap jerk." Sophia Julian crumpled the note. He had lost his wife, his house, his company, his mistress, and his dignity in less than a month. He had nowhere to go. His credit cards were declined. His friends weren't answering. He checked into a cheap motel in Queens, using the last few $100s of cash in his wallet. The room smelled of stale smoke and despair. He sat on the lumpy bed and dialed Marcus, his lawyer. "You have to pick up, Marcus," Julian whispered. "You're the only one left." Marcus picked up on the last ring. "Julian," Marcus said, his voice hushed. "Don't call me again. I'm cutting a deal." "A deal? With who?" "With the district attorney. And with Vance." "Vance!" Julian shouted. "He's a nobody. He's a gardener." "He's not a gardener, Julian," Marcus hissed. "I looked him up. I dug deep. Arthur Vance isn't just a forensic accountant. In the 90s, he was the primary consultant for the Department of Justice on asset forfeiture. He wrote the book on how to strip white-collar criminals of their wealth. He knows where the bodies are buried because he dug the graves." Marcus took a breath. "He found the emails, Julian. The ones where we discussed backdating the stock options. He has everything. I'm testifying against you to stay out of prison. It's over." The line went dead. Julian stared at the phone. He wasn't sad. He was enraged. A cold, hard fury settled in his chest. "It's not over," he whispered to the empty room. "I still have the leverage." He remembered the safety deposit box in Jersey City. It contained Physical hard drives, blackmail material on half the city council. If he was going down, he was taking everyone with him. He grabbed his coat. He would go to Jersey. He would get the drives. He would become the most dangerous man in New York. November 14th, 2023. First National Bank, Jersey City. Julian wore a baseball cap and sunglasses. He looked like any other celebrity trying to hide, or perhaps a criminal on the run. He felt like both. He walked into the bank vault area. The security guard checked his ID. "Mr. Thorne, box 404, right this way." Julian's heart pounded. This was it, the dead man's switch. He had copies of illicit transactions involving senators, judges, and business rivals. He could trade this information for immunity. He could trade it for his life back. He inserted his key. The guard inserted the master key. They turned them in unison. The long metal box slid out. Julian carried it to the private viewing room. He locked the door. His hands were sweating so much he could barely grip the lid. He opened the box. It was empty. No hard drives, no documents, no leverage. In the center of the metal box sat a single, ripe, red tomato. Underneath the tomato was a business card. It was cream-colored, thick cardstock with embossed lettering, "Arthur Vance, Consultant." On the back of the card, in that same elegant handwriting, was a message. "I removed the rot from your life, Julian. Now you can start fresh. I suggest you start by learning to grow something other than greed." Julian stared at the tomato. It was absurd. It was terrifying. How? How had he gotten in? This was a bank vault. Julian flipped the card over. There was a phone number scrawled in pencil. Julian dialed it. "Hello, Julian." Arthur's voice was calm, steady. "You broke into a bank!" Julian screamed. "That's a felony." "I didn't break in," Arthur replied. "I simply executed a power of attorney. You see, when you married Eleanor, you signed a prenuptial agreement that you drafted, remember?" "Yes, to protect my assets." "You didn't read the fine print of the amendment I sent over the day before the wedding," Arthur said. Clause 14, Section B. In the event of mental incapacitation or moral turpitude proven by a court of law, the power of attorney over all physical assets reverts to the spouse's next of kin to ensure safe keeping. Since you were indicted yesterday morning, the clause triggered. I legally emptied the box an hour ago. Julian slid to the floor, his back against the wall. You tricked me." "I protected my daughter," Arthur said. "You thought she was weak because she was kind. You thought I was weak because I was quiet. You mistook peace for passivity. That was your fatal error." "What do you want?" Julian sobbed. "I have nothing left. You took the money. You took the company. You took the leverage. What else do you want?" "I want you to admit it," Arthur said. "Admit what?" "That you lost, that you are small, and I want you to apologize to her." "Never," Julian spat. "I'll rot in hell before I apologize to that useless woman." "Then you will rot in prison," Arthur said. "The hard drives are on the desk of the FBI director as we speak. Enjoy the view, Julian." May 14th, 2024, the night before sentencing. Julian Thorne sat on the edge of a narrow mattress in a studio apartment in the Bronx. It was a far cry from the penthouse on Fifth Avenue and light years away from the sprawling estate in Greenwich. This was all he could afford after his assets were frozen, his accounts drained, and his bail posted. The radiator in the corner hissed and clanked, a mocking rhythm that kept him awake. He stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. The man looking back was a ghost. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with dark, bruised circles. His hair, once perfectly coiffed and dyed a rich chestnut, was now thinning and streaked with aggressive patches of grey. He had lost 20 pounds. The bespoke suits were gone, sold to pay for a legal defense that had ultimately failed. His phone sat on the wobbly table. It had been silent for 3 days. In the old days, 6 months ago, his phone would vibrate every 30 seconds. Deals, dinner invites, women, brokers. Now, silence. He had scrolled through his contacts list earlier, hovering his thumb over names of men he had made rich. Charles, David, the senator. He had called them all. All of them had blocked his number. Julian poured himself a glass of tap water. It tasted metallic. "It's not over," he muttered to the empty room, his voice raspy. "I can talk my way out of this. I always do. I'm Julian Thorne." But for the first time in his life, the lie didn't comfort him. He closed his eyes and saw the image of the tomato in the safe deposit box. A simple piece of fruit that had terrified him more than a loaded gun. It was a message. "I can reach you anywhere." May 15th, 2024. The Federal District Court, Southern District of New York. The morning of the sentencing was grey and drizzling, a fitting backdrop for the funeral of a reputation. As Julian stepped out of the taxi, he couldn't afford a town car. The media swarm descended. It was a chaotic sea of flashing bulbs and shouting voices. But the tone had changed. 6 months ago, they asked about his stock prices. Today, they smelled blood. "Julian, do you have a statement for the employees who lost their pensions? Mr. Thorne, are you afraid of general population? Julian, look this way. Give us a smile for the mugshot." He kept his head down, shielding his eyes with a trembling hand. His lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named Mr. Gorski, because Marcus had long since turned state's witness, shouldered him through the crowd. "Don't say a word, Julian," Gorski muttered. "Just look remorseful." Remorse, a foreign concept. Julian didn't feel remorse. He felt cheated. He felt like the victim of a complex conspiracy orchestrated by a jealous old man. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy and stale. The room was packed to capacity. Julian walked down the center aisle, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on his back. He sat at the defense table and dared to look at the gallery behind him. The first 3 rows were filled with people he recognized. Not friends. Victims. There was his former VP of operations, a man who had lost his retirement fund when Julian gutted the pension scheme. There was the owner of the small trucking company Julian had driven into bankruptcy to acquire their roots. And there, in the back row, sitting in a pool of quiet dignity, were Elena and Arthur. Elena wore a navy blue dress, modest and elegant. She looked healthier than he had ever seen her. Her skin glowed. She wasn't looking at the floor or wringing her hands as she used to during their arguments. She was looking straight at him, her expression unreadable. Next to her, Arthur Vance sat like a statue carved from granite. He wore a simple tweed jacket. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't frowning. He was simply observing, like a scientist watching a specimen in a jar. Julian quickly turned back to the front, his heart hammering against his ribs. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honorable Judge Harrison swept into the room. She was a woman known for her intellect and her lack of patience for white-collar criminals. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at Julian. "We are here for the sentencing of United States vs. Julian Thorne," she began, her voice crisp. "The defendant has been found guilty on 24 counts, including wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny." The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named D'Amico, stood up. "Your Honor," D'Amico said, pacing in front of the jury box, "Julian Thorne didn't just steal money, he stole lives. He treated the economy like his personal casino and his employees like chips to be cashed in. He displayed a level of narcissism and greed that is breathtaking even in this jurisdiction. But what makes him truly dangerous is his complete lack of accountability. Even now, he believes he is the victim. D'Amico pointed a finger at Julian. He destroyed his wife's credit. He attempted to bankrupt her father. He gutted a company that employed 4,000 people. The people request the maximum sentence. Mr. Gorski stood up weakly. Your Honor, my client is a first-time offender. He built a logistics empire from nothing. The pressure of the market caused him to make errors in judgment. We ask for leniency. Judge Harrison looked at Julian. Mr. Thorne, you have the right to speak before I pass sentence. Do you have anything to say? Julian stood up. His legs felt like jelly. He smoothed his cheap suit jacket. This was his moment. He needed to charm her. He needed to sell the story. Your Honor, Julian began, his voice shaking slightly before finding its old smooth rhythm. I am a businessman. In business, risks are taken. Sometimes paperwork gets messy. I admit I was ambitious. Perhaps too ambitious. But I did it for my family. I did it to provide a good life for my ex-wife. He turned to look at Eleanor, hoping to see a soften in her eyes. There was none. I am not a criminal, Julian continued, his voice rising, the arrogance bleeding through despite his best efforts to hide it. I am a job creator. If you put me away, you are punishing the very spirit of American enterprise. I was targeted. I was sabotaged by people who were jealous of my success. A murmur went through the crowd. Judge Harrison took off her glasses. She rubbed the bridge of her nose. Mr. Thorne, she said quietly. The room went deathly silent. I have sat on this bench for 20 years. I have sentenced murderers, gang leaders, and drug traffickers. And yet, I have rarely seen a soul as hollow as yours. Julian flinched. You didn't do this for your family, the judge continued, her voice rising with steel. You did this for your ego. You just stood there and blamed your ambition for stealing $12 million from a family trust. You blamed your enemies for the fact that you forged signatures. You are not a businessman, Mr. Thorne. You are a predator in a suit. She looked at her papers. Julian Thorne, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. The gasp from the gallery was audible. 15 years. You will serve a minimum of 12 years before being eligible for parole, she added. Additionally, I am ordering full restitution of all stolen assets. Since your personal assets have already been seized, future earnings will be garnished until the debt is paid. She banged the gavel. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Remand to custody immediately. 2 U.S. Marshals moved in behind Julian. There was no politeness this time. They grabbed his arms. Hands behind your back. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut. It was a sound of finality. As they marched him toward the side door, the door that led to the holding cells and the transport van, Julian panicked. The reality crashed down on him. He wasn't going back to the apartment. He wasn't going to have a drink. He was going to a cage. He twisted his head, desperate for a lifeline. "Elena!" he shouted, breaking decorum. "Elena! You can't let them do this! I made you who you are!" Elena stood up. She walked slowly to the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. The marshals paused, allowing the brief interaction. Julian looked at her, his eyes wild. Tell them I was a good husband." Eleanor looked at him with a sadness that was devastating, because it was devoid of hate. It was the look one gives to a rabid dog that has to be put down. "You weren't a husband, Julian," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. "You were a lesson, and I've learned it." She turned to Arthur. I'm ready to go, Dad. Arthur Vance stood up. He buttoned his tweed jacket. He walked to the railing and looked Julian directly in the eyes. For the first time, Arthur smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a chess master who had announced mate in 3 moves and watched his opponent struggle for an hour. Arthur leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for Julian to hear. You bragged about taking her queen, Arthur said. You forgot the king was still on the board. Arthur tapped his temple. Enjoy the silence, Julian. The marshals shoved Julian forward. Let's go, Thorne. He was dragged through the door, his screams of protest cut off as the heavy steel door slammed shut. The Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville was known for being relatively comfortable, but a prison is still a prison. Julian sat in the recreation yard. It was November now. The wind was biting. He was sweeping the concrete. That was his job now. The CEO of Thorne Logistics was paid 12 cents an hour to push a broom. He stopped to catch his breath. His back hurried. He looked at the other inmates. They didn't care about his stock portfolio. They didn't care about his suits. In here, he was just inmate 89402. He was weak. He was older. He was prey. He kept his head down, sweeping the dust, again and again. A guard walked by, holding a stack of mail. Thorne, letter for you. Julian dropped the broom. He grabbed the envelope. His heart leapt. Maybe it was an appeal. Maybe it was Sophia coming back. He tore it open. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the New York Times business section. The headline read, Historic bookstore revitalizes upstate town. The quiet success of Vance and daughter. There was a picture. It showed Eleanor laughing, holding a ribbon-cutting scissors. She looked free. Standing next to her, looking uncomfortable in the spotlight, was Arthur. Julian scanned the article. The venture was funded by the restitution payments from the collapse of Thorne Logistics. We wanted to build something real, says owner Elena Vance. Something that adds value to the world rather than taking it away. When asked about her father's role, Mr. Vance simply commented, I just help with the gardening. Julian crumpled the newspaper in his fist. He looked at the grey walls, the razor wire, the bleak sky. He had spent 10 years building a fortune based on lies, and Arthur Vance had dismantled it in 10 weeks, using nothing but the truth. He dropped the crumpled paper on the ground and resumed sweeping. There was nothing else to do. Up in the Catskills, the snow was beginning to fall outside the cabin. Inside, the fire was roaring. The smell of roasted chicken and herbs filled the small kitchen. Arthur sat in his leather armchair, a book open on his lap. It was The Count of Monte Cristo. He was rereading his favorite chapter. Elena walked in, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. She set one down on the side table. You know, Dad, she said, sitting on the rug by the fire. I got a call from Marcus's wife today. Oh? Arthur didn't look up from his book. She said Marcus is having a hard time finding work now that he's been disbarred. She wanted to know if we knew anyone hiring. Arthur took a sip of cocoa. I might know a guy who needs help shoveling manure at the dairy farm down the road. Honest work. Good for the soul. Elena laughed, a bright, genuine sound that chased away the shadows of the last few years. You're terrible, she said. I'm practical, Arthur replied. He closed the book and looked at his daughter. You did good, Ellie, he said softly. You stood up. You walked away. That took more strength than anything I did. I had backup, she smiled. Arthur looked out the window at the falling snow, covering the world in a blanket of white. Power isn't about controlling people, Ellie, he said, watching the flakes drift down. Julian thought power was noise. He thought it was shouting and grabbing. But real power is like gravity. You don't see it, you don't hear it, but it keeps your feet on the ground, and if you try to fight it, you fall. He patted her hand. Now, drink your cocoa. We have a lot of books to sell tomorrow. Elena drank. The fire crackled. The world was quiet, and for the first time in a decade, it was safe. The wolves had been chased away. The gardener was back to tending his plants, and somewhere far away, the man who thought he had won everything was learning the value of nothing. Julian Thorne spent his life building a castle on a foundation of sand, convinced that he was untouchable. He mistook Elena's silence for weakness, and Arthur's age for irrelevance. But as he sits in a cell today, sweeping floors for pennies, he has 12 long years to think about his mistake. He learned that the scariest people aren't the ones who brag about their power. The scariest people are the ones who have the power to destroy you, but choose to live quietly until you give them a reason not to. What was your favorite moment? Was it the tomato in the bank vault or the final line in the courtroom? Let me know in the comments. And listen, if you believe in karma and justice, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It tells YouTube to share this story with more people. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here for the next saga. Until next time, stay humble and watch out for the quiet ones.